Welcome to the Inside Sales Enablement Podcast. Where has the profession been? Where is it now? And where is it heading? What does it mean to you, your company, other functions, the market? Find out here. Join the founding father of the sales enablement profession, Scott Santucci, and trailblazer Brian Lambert as they take you behind the scenes of the birth of an industry. The Inside Sales Enablement Podcast starts now.
I'm Scott Santucci.
I'm Brian Lambert, and together we're the Sales Enablement Insiders. Today we're going to do a special edition to help our audience be the most equipped and prepared to navigate these trying times. Insider Nation, this week we actually hit 10,000 listeners from across the globe. I'm super excited about that. We've had listeners from 15 different countries and on 7 or 8 major podcast platforms. So thank you so much for that. And thanks for continuing to provide us feedback over at www.insidese.com. So in this particular episode, Scott and I are continuing to record a 4-part series with our distinguished panel of experts. Before I hand it over to Scott, I wanted to remind you that we've convened this lively discussion and debate with an academic thought leader, a top-performing salesperson, a portfolio leader to some of the biggest names in technology, and also shared our analysis and synthesis of what we're seeing in the context of the COVID-19 global virus. Why did we do this? Well, it's simple. It's to help you lead your team and make an impact while adding strategic value to your leadership and organization. Changes are going to happen, and you need to skate to the puck. So let's recap. In part 1 of our COVID-19 series, that was episode 27. We framed out the landscape and compared the current economic times to past recessions. In this episode, episode 28, we're jumping into part 2, where we discuss and project and make a call on what we believe will likely happen inside most organizations so you can make a better plan and differentiate your leadership and approach to add strategic value. And I also wanted to let you know that in part 3 of our series, it's chock full of what you can do to lead from the front and balance strategies and tactics. That's episode 29. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with part 4, which I'm excited about. That's a rapid fire question and answer session where Scott and I answer as many of the questions as possible that we're getting from you. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you add us to your podcast player, and let's get started. Scott, take it away.
Excellent. Now we're ready for chunk 2. So this is what we did is gave an overview of the environment to get more clarity. Now we need to predict. Let's talk about uncertainty. What actions are going to happen inside your company? What's going to happen? Now, obviously, this isn't exactly true, but it gives us a template. There are common behaviors that all companies follow when they pull out the recession kit, and that recession kit gets broken by the CFO, right? So to start this off, Kunal had an amazing and maybe surreal experience where he ran what was supposed to be a dinner, but it was just him and John Chambers having dinner together while people were videoing in. If you don't know who John Chambers is, he's the former CEO of Cisco. And Cisco has or John Chambers has a long history of outperforming the market and market expectations. So he had the opportunity to have dinner with them. I think this gives us a foundation for some clear insight about what tactics and actions other companies will take. So, Kunal, you want to take the first stab at helping us give clarity about what's probably going to happen inside our businesses?
So, if you're asking me about summarizing the dinner with John Chambers, it was certainly myself and a few others, and it's kind of like meeting with Yoda, right? Someone with so much wisdom and has seen the movie so many different times in so many different angles. He just has amazing advice. So I'm just going to give you a stream of consciousness here. Transparency to a fault was kind of bullet point number 1. Bullet point number 2 is asking CEOs to take a look at their go-to-market and just pick 3 things or even less. And if it doesn't impact the top or the bottom line, it's not one of the things to focus on. And then report out to employees, customers, investors your progress on those three things. Another lesson learned from him is be aggressive with your changes. Don't wait, don't witness and watch, but lead, and be aggressive with your changes, because he went through 4 different scenarios where the market had just been in chaos, and in each scenario, they gained anywhere from 10 to 20 points of market share, which he outlined that in a lot of detail. They're looking at this from, and John Chambers is also an investor in many different companies right now. They're advising their companies that this is going to be anywhere from 3 to 5 quarters of kind of what they see as pain, a quick bounce back post that period. The other area is treating customers during a crisis well, and engaging them matters. The top 10% of your customers should have the CEO's phone number, because they don't need any stress in terms of services right now, so they should be able to get to you. And just more pragmatic advice was putting your foot on the brakes in just terms of other spend. If you couldn't associate an ROI to your spend, just cut that so you can focus on going after market share and going after the competition. And then I'd say the other really pragmatic view that he provided, he's like, there's things in an organization that you just know are inefficient, but it hasn't been a priority to stop those processes. So this is the time to just pull. If it's inefficient, it doesn't show an ROI, it's time to pull the plug on those processes. So there's no better time to do that than when you absolutely have to do it. And he considers this time to be certainly one of those times.
So I want to tease out a couple things and get your comments on this, Kunal. So having been in this field for so long, with Forrester or with the Sales Enablement Society, or experience with Conference Board, or working with clients, there seems to be a divide between the C-suite and the doers. And I'm just being real simple about that. I don't mean like labor and management and anything like that, right? This isn't 1888, but there seems to be a divide in perspective. And when you talk to doers, there's a default, well, they're going to get rid of our jobs because all they care about the money. What I'm going to challenge you a little bit is, here we heard the voice and the exact words of a CEO that's incredibly well respected. And I'm going to ask all of us to really reflect. Did he sound cutthroat? Did any of that tone to you, Kunal, sound cutthroat?
No, not at all. In fact, I would be remiss if I didn't say he ended dinner saying how important it is to be integrated in your community right now as well, and make sure that you're also giving back at that time. So none of it at all was cutthroat. I thought he was super pragmatic with the advice that he gave.
So what I want to do is I want to weave that point in, because it's really important. If you are in an individual contributor role, or you have a relatively small team, and there's a whole bunch of other people involved, you need to take a little bit of time to think about the community, aka your own business community. Does John Chambers evaluate your own personal contributions, or does he look at the sum of the parts? What are the sum of the parts that you're participating in? So this is something that we're going to challenge our listeners to really get, because it's a gap we don't think people see. Part of it is sales enablement leaders don't feel valued. Okay, granted. The flip side is, do they really understand what their economic contribution is to the rest of the company and how they make customers more successful? And that's something that's a debate that you have to wrestle with yourself. But I think it really maps to what Brian shared earlier in our transition point here, between the transition of, you can believe what you want to leave, please confront reality. Kunal, what are some of the tips that TCV is doing, and how are you guys advising your clients? Is it very similar? Is it similar advice to what John shared?
Yeah, I would say it's extremely similar. There's a scorecard that focuses kind of on a rapid checklist to make sure we're hitting a few key areas around health and safety, in terms of protecting employees, around liquidity and P&L, defending against revenue declines, kind of making sure we're stabilizing the operations for this normal that we have right now. There are scenarios to conserve cash and take out costs where they're not necessary. But there's also, I think what John said is there is this notion of also wanting to play offense, not just defense. So we can bounce, when we do bounce back, we're ready to bounce back fast. But also while we're in this environment, there is going to be an opportunity to go on offense as well. It's important to have checklists in all of those areas.
Yeah, and I think what I want to stress is, having had the opportunity through Kunal to interview many of the investors who sit on these boards of directors, the way that they talk is easily misinterpreted as because they use metrics and they understand metrics completely differently than the rest of us. If you, as a sales enablement professional or a sales leader or whomever, are, resist metrics because of math or whatever it is, please confront that and find a way to understand what the metrics mean, because there's meaning behind it. And just because it's a calculation doesn't mean it's cold. And when you start inferring that it's cold and it's about the bottom line, it drives the wrong decisions, which is not what the investors want. The investors want you to get rid of the stuff that doesn't work and focus on finding new opportunities to make the company more valuable. That's it. So I think that's an important thing to heed. Now, Dr. Dover, you're an educator by profession, and I think that's a good transition point. What are some of the things that you see are going to happen based on your interactions with executive leaders?
Well, I think the first thing is to realize that we were in an impotent state before the crisis started. So I think the fact that the crisis has now hit, the question is this going to be the tipping point? And so what I mean by that is that there are a lot of different companies who have been doubling down on certain strategies, trying to throw new tools, throw new people, throw new training at the problem. And the efficacy of those efforts have been consistently less than exciting. So we have actually pretty heavy turnover rates in the sales leadership position because of this fact that whatever the traditional methodology is out there, it hasn't been working. And so behind the scenes, a lot of companies will sit down and say, hey, I had one global leader call me. We haven't talked for 3 years because they quit doing work with us for 3 years ago. And it's more of a traditional approach, but in the high-end B2C space, selling into business executives. And he said, hey, everything we're doing, its efficacy is dropping off and has been dropping off for 18 to 24 months. And I said, yes. Where have you been? And he had left us about 3 years ago when we started seeing the beginning of this from our partners, to saying that outreach had to be different and we had to be a little bit more fine-tuned. At the same time, we found scaling, and everybody's gone through the scale. So now the question is, we're scaled up, we have all this capacity. One of the MBA clubs, I actually had a conversation with them after a keynote that I did in Vegas. The guy called me up and said, thank you for letting me know that, we're probably overplayed on activities, because I've actually eliminated all activity tracking in my sales org. And I said, that's not what I said in my keynote. And he said, I know, but that's what I heard. That's what I heard in the keynote, is that I shouldn't be tracking activities. I should be tracking activities that actually move revenue. And so we're actually removing some of the metrics. So I think one of the things that's interesting, I think from a sales enablement lens and even a leadership lens, is that the root cause was here before the crisis that just hit us. Mm-hmm. So we were already in a crisis mode as a sales and marketing space. So this is actually facilitating. In the last segment, but I think it's relevant to this segment, is I read a book once on the stock market crash. And what it talked about is that we have manias followed by a shock, which then induces a panic, which then creates a crisis. Well, we were in a mania prior to this moment where we were investing in demand gen at levels and then automating that investment in demand gen. What's amazing to me is that if that's done right, it creates a multiplier effect, but then the head count isn't required. So the guy from the MBA, I won't say his name because I don't have his permission to say the name. He said that they have one of the smallest head counts in the MBA, and yet they have the most profit per seat in the MBA, and they have a losing team every year. But they've found a way to multiply the efforts of their salespeople in a productive way. But according to Jim Dickey, less than 1% of sales organizations to 2% of sales organizations have even started to deploy artificial intelligence tools. And yet those artificial intelligence tools augment our capacity to do the job with precision instead of scale.
Well, Howard, I was going to say, I think, one of the things that I think you said that it's incredibly important is, and not well understood, is sales enablement needs to get really good at stitching together business results like, growth, number of customers with 2 or more products, or whatever the business result is that you're looking for, with the objectives that need to happen and then the activities that need to happen. And that stitching together, I would view as very much a broken process. And then, and Scott, to your point, when general partners get frustrated and they look at a sales and marketing efficiency ratio, they have a hard time understanding why an enablement person or the sales organization or the marketing organization can't figure out the right activities to drive this ratio that they're looking for.
I think that's great, and I'm going to pick up on something Dr. Dover shared with us. So I think what we have, it's not I think, I know. If we look at sales as one big monolith, one big giant thing, that perspective is going to lead to a lot of waste and inefficiency. And that inefficiency is going to cause the investors, whether it be the C-suite in a large public company or the people who sit on boards for a private equity company, to replace the leadership. And then you're going to get a whole new set of things to worry about. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all sales force, and we're going to hear a little bit from Lindsey, on this. But an inside sales organization is different than a strategic accounts organization, is different than a vertical specialized organization. So one of the things that will happen, and I very much agree that there was a lot of poison in the well, but the overall economic health masked a lot of inefficiencies in sales and marketing.
Absolutely.
So what we have is a day of reckoning, and we can either look at it as scary or a great opportunity for innovation. And I think what Kunal just said was, this is a great opportunity for an innovation. Just make sure you're aware of what that is. So when I was at Forrester, I did a lot of analysis of what works. I became sort of obsessed with the what works analysis, or 80-20 analysis, rather than just survey type of analysis. And one of the best examples or stories that we could plot over time was BMC. So BMC had a strategy to get out of the economic recovery. So it started, in the depths of the deep recession. They had this vision called business service management. And a lot of investors really liked it. As a matter of fact, one of my friends was an investor, and he bought into that investment, hook, line, and sinker. They made a big position in that. A year later, so we fast forward to 2010, a year later, or half a year later, what were their results? While they'd grown their revenues 30%, their market cap gained 0 because they weren't demonstrating economic growth or organic growth. Here's the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem was that in order to execute business service management, that concept, and Kunal, you remember that we had you were at HP at the time, and you heard from one of your clients how much in love they were with the BSM vision.
For sure.
Here's the problem. The problem is they built a sales engine where the chief sales officer bragged on earnings calls that their strategy was if a sales rep misses their number 2 quarters or less, they're out. But when you talk to the people who would buy, who, somebody like the guy that we talked to, I'm sorry to be vague. It's not appropriate to talk about who these people are. But this guy that Kunal and I are referring to had a budget of over $1 billion. And he was in the process of coming up with a game plan about what his spending is going to look like. So if your business strategy is disruptive, you have to give your salespeople time to build out that case internally. There's no way they're going to be able to build it in 2 quarter windows. So what happened was the sales execution didn't happen. They drove off most of their sales force. They never hit their numbers. Their stock declined. And it took that pain for the CEO to realize, maybe we made the wrong call. When that call could have been easily prevented by just asking the question, who is going to buy the BSM story? And it's CIOs. Are they going to buy that BSM story in quarter, quarter by quarter by quarter transactionally? No, they're not. So therefore, a sales model needs to look this way. It's a simple conversation, but it's one that isn't being had. Whereas other businesses did make that. In contrast, we took 2 companies, one that was a wild, not so good coming out, and one that was great coming out, was Accenture. And Accenture redid their entire business from the ground up because they thought the economy was going to fundamentally reset itself. So apples to apples comparison, BMC's market cap during that period of time grew 0. That's bad, by the way, guys, in a rebound. What was Accenture's growth rate? It was 136%. If you're an investor in that, you're super happy in that short period of time. So the reason that I bring that up is it creates a lot of opportunities. So what we're going to see is 2 scenarios. We're going to see companies execute in the new reality, like they get the business strategy right, but they don't rethink how they execute because they have a narrow lens. We do it the same way over and over and over again. Unfortunately, the departments that are most likely to be handcuffed by what are called cognitive biases is sales and marketing. So this creates an opportunity, but also creates some friction about how you bring these things up. So what I predict is going to happen is we are going to see lots of budget cuts. We'll get into prescriptions later, but they are either going to happen. What you want to do is make sure that the budget cuts that are happening aren't lobbing off limbs and that they're cutting fat. How do you help them cut fat? You do the ROI analysis, like Kunal mentioned. The other thing that we're going to see are entirely new strategies emerging, and we're going to see more of a portfolio approach to sales and marketing because it just only makes sense. These are the things that we're going to see. They're the patterns that emerged out of it. The difficulty here is these patterns are going to emerge really, really fast. So now's your opportunity to really make some changes happen. So those are my predictions. I'm going to go on record on that, and I'm happy with my track record of calling these things. So I want to turn it over to Lindsey. Let's given these trends, what sort of things that you're seeing in the field, and what resonated or not resonated about what will occur moving forward.
Yeah, I think all of the things that you guys talked about were really interesting. I think from a salesperson perspective, who's, my job is measured by metrics, and ultimately it's the total of how much revenue I bring in. But then there's, usually activity-based metrics that are, how I get measured on, am I doing the right things towards getting that revenue? And I think what I hear you guys saying is that, there's probably, hopefully, a significant opportunity to rethink what those metrics are actually measuring, and are they the right metrics that are actually leading to revenue, or are they, metrics that were old and part of an older sales model? And I think I tend to agree with what Dr. Dover was saying, that a lot of activity-based metrics are not necessarily, the right metrics, as you're trying to move a customer forward in a sales cycle, depending on what it is that you're selling. And what needs to be measured. The other thing that's interesting too is that so much of the responsibility or accountability for those metrics rests solely on the salesperson, not very much the rest of the organization that is supposed to be helping the salesperson sell and drive revenue. So that's just an interesting point that sounds like you guys are seeing some opportunity for change as these systems get rebuilt or reassessed, given all that's going on in the current market climate.
Awesome. So Brian, what does it mean for our audience?
Day of reckoning. I think you said that, Scott. To net that out or breathe some life into that, the challenge in building pipeline could very well be, building pipeline. The concept of building is, add more, do more, and doing more. And to use Dr. Dover's analogy of overplowing fields, the day of reckoning is upon us. And what if, as a sales enablement professional, ask yourself, what if you were overbuilt? What if your function or your sales team was overbuilt? Think about how busy you were. Think about how much activity you had. Think about how much you did. And then all of a sudden the world stopped. And what happened? What did you do? And I think there's a good time to reflect on, based on this conversation, the value that you're adding to build, not to build pipeline, but as Kunal said, to stitch growth together. And what does that mean? Whether it's a portfolio approach like Scott mentioned, or Lindsey's comments around, what are you actually asking salespeople to do? And then more importantly, what's working and how do you help? And if you're not doing that as a sales enablement professional, you probably aren't taking advantage of this opportunity to add strategic value.
Thanks for joining us. To become an insider and amplify your journey, make sure you've subscribed to our show. If you have an idea for what Scott and Brian can cover in a future podcast, or have a story to share, please email them at engage@insidese.com. You can also connect with them online by going to insidese.com, following them on Twitter, or sending them a LinkedIn request.